Greetings, friends of liberty. When we contemplate feelings of anger and wrath, in what better manner might we illustrate their enormously destructive power than by peering yet again across from the cliffs of Dover on a clear day to our French neighbours? We Englishmen feel, given present circumstance, 'tis indeed most fortunate, as dear as the French are to us, that we have that magnificent natural barrier, the channel between their croissants and our crumpets. For in their anger and wrath, those Frenchies now engage in an entire panoply of dastardly acts. The blade of Mademoiselle Guillotine never ceases her harvest. The drownings of innocents, as at Nantes, the law of suspects, by which law over 10,000 were killed with no cause, merely on suspicion of being rebels, and the plan to destroy the entire city of Lyon, among others. No, the crimes of angry France proceed without end as we speak. 'Tis unfortunate, then, when we turn to your 21st century in North America, that we also see a rise of anger and wrath among the people of America that we must recognize as real. In his book, Wrath, America Enraged, written in 2021, noted anthropologist and president of the National Association of Scholars, Peter Wood, author also of a previous book on American anger entitled A Bee in the Mouth, again returns to the subject to describe anger in American history. From the Boston Tea Party and Revolutionary War, to John Brown, Carrie Nation, and Malcolm X, to that famous letter carrier James Brooks, the first person ever to go postal, to Howard Dean in his apoplectic rage on the campaign trail, to the NBA, now arguably a thug league, to the look of new cars from the front, which seem increasingly malevolent, to the rise of hip-hop and rap, to finally, not long ago, the increasing rage exemplified by BLM, Antifa, and the Capitol Hill riots of 2020. Over that period of 2+ centuries, Wood believes that we possibly have undergone a national metamorphosis from the admonition, "Don't tread on me," to, "You want a piece of me?" His purpose, however, in writing is not, as he says, to dampen anyone's anger. I just want to step back from the immediate sense of wrath to help us figure out where and how we can direct it. And if your anger is beginning to fade and you are concluding that we can wait this out, I want to remind you that your anger is worth sustaining. You will need it. He starts quite directly and promisingly by defining his terms. What is the difference between wrath and anger? How dare you ask? That's anger. I will destroy you. That's wrath. And what could change anger to wrath? He says two things. First, a significant number of people who share the sentiment and who sense their common affront. Second, their collective sense that they face an impossible situation. He then lists some issues that, for him, as a conservative, are legitimate causes for grievance. A, progressive anti-racism. B, the 1619 Project, which he's written a book against. C, abolishing our national border and flooding the country with illegal immigrants. D, the defunding of the police. E, the embrace of Greta Thunberg's energy alarmism. F, gun control. G, the lockdown idiocy attendant to the Wuhan flu. H, that liberals claiming the need to protect voter rights seek to lock into place the subterfuges they used to steal the 2020 presidential election. I, a corrupt press. J, never Trumpers. K, the mostly peaceful riots with their billions in property damage and over a dozen killed. L, BLM and their hostility to the nuclear family. And M, cancel culture. Throughout the book, he juxtaposes two main political groups. The progressives on the one hand, who control the majority of American institutions, and Christians, populists, members of the middle class, and a significant category of Americans who see themselves as upholders of our national identity as opposed to wearing some kind of global post-national bracelet on the other. In his descriptions, he clearly conveys his feeling that the Republicans are the abused party. For example, he says, "It was reported that, less than a month after Trump's inauguration, more than 12,000 tweets had gone out calling for the president's assassination." He giving numerous examples of angry Democrats contemplating killing the president. But although I would agree that Democrats are probably more expressive of their anger in this respect, with comedian Kathy Griffin's infamous example of holding up what appeared to be Trump's severed head drenched in blood, I suspect too that there are plenty of tweets in private by angry Tea Party members about the Lion King, President Obama. As Woods proceeds, one of the main tasks he sets himself, as mentioned, is in describing the greater self-control and reserve that he believes previous generations of Americans possessed, exemplified by individuals such as George Washington, whose volatile temper was rarely allowed on display, to Jackie Robinson steeling himself to endure racist insults on the diamond, and to the fiction of Louisa May Alcott's Little Women, where the mother talks about the self-control her angry temperament often required. This counsel of calmness and reserve was mirrored in earlier scholarly works such as that of Ruth Benedict, an anthropologist in the 1930s who studied the relatively expressionless Zuni Indian tribe, in her famous book Patterns of Culture, to psychologist Daniel Goleman, who argued, among other things, in his popular book Emotional Intelligence in 1995, for simply walking away from angry situations. In contrast, many recent works of psychology or psychotherapy, or at least those he cites, recommend a catharsis of released rage, or at least encourage its ready expression. He says, for example, in The Anger Advantage, The Surprising Benefits of Anger and How It Can Change a Woman's Life, 2003, the authors set out to debunk what they saw as myths that stand in the way of connection with our goals and dreams. More recently, he lists the 2018 books Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger, and Eloquent Rage, A Black Feminist Discovers Her Superpower, as well as in addition the 2019 Burn It Down, Women Writing About Anger. Wood believes that he was among the first in noticing this transitional trend and that others in the academic community are now starting to catch up. As other pieces of evidence, he offers selections of anger from the internet and social media, citing websites on the left like Daily Kos, but I think it can be said that there are also numerous websites on the right like Breitbart who are also angry. The basic problem that develops, however, is that Dr. Wood doesn't offer any convincing explanation as to why Americans are apparently becoming more angry. All he says briefly for a couple pages is that since 1776, Americans went from being a rural agricultural society to primarily an urban and suburban society. As a result, people in these more urban settings felt more free to express themselves and thus express more anger. For me, this explanation completely fails because the wrath has only really appeared in the last half century, and the process of urbanization occurred for much longer. He also ignores all the other actual reasons that Americans have become more angry. Let's go through some of these by first breaking down angry situations into three categories. First is the category where people should be angry, but they're not. Like that pacifistic Buddhist monk who gently blows on a blood-sucking mosquito in his arm to repel it, instead of simply crushing it in his anger. Secondly, there are situations where people have a right to be angry, and they are angry. And thirdly, there are situations where people have no reason to be angry, but they're angry anyway. So let's forget our Buddhist monk and concentrate on the last two categories, starting with when people are angry when they have a right to be angry. This anger often results, either directly or indirectly, when their rights have been violated, generally when government over time gets bigger and bigger and more controlling. And this has certainly happened in America over the last 200 years. So a typical example here would be with education, both with K-12 and college. Government now has enormously more control over K-12 than it did when the country started, when most K-12 education was either homeschooling, private, or public schooling with local town control. And now, American parents are reported to the FBI for complaining to their school boards. Why does that happen? Again, because Americans have a huge federal Department of Education controlled by the teachers' unions and Randy Weingarten and the President of the United States, who all attempt to control your children, teaching them either that they're racist or the victims of racism, that girls really are boys and boys girls, and that, as AOC says, will all burn up in 12 years. So naturally, both children and parents are horrified and angry that they've lost control of their right to educate their children as they once had. Peter Wood doesn't breathe a word of this loss of control to the government with all the enormous harm and anger that results. Secondly, if we turn to education in colleges, the enormous amounts of governmental money taken from the American taxpayer and funneled into those colleges since World War II means that tuition prices have skyrocketed, making everyone angry, unhappy, and often in debt, while at the same time those colleges have used that money to create thousands of politically correct and woke departments in black, white, indigenous, post-colonial, queer, environmental and sustainability, gender and women's, and fat and disability studies. Previously, when colleges were overwhelmingly private and state and federal aid didn't exist, tuition stayed very low, making everyone happy, while at the same time not allowing colleges to facilitate the emergence of these many new ideologies they've since created with that money. And this process of increasing governmental funding and control occurs in many other areas of society as well. In finance and commerce, with the Federal Reserve creating huge booms and busts, the drug war, environmental regulations, civil rights laws which control the behavior of institutions, many destructive regulations in medicine and public health, as COVID with its disastrous lockdown showed, and many, many others. So that's our second category of anger. Getting angry when you have a right to be. Let's now turn to the third, when people don't have a right to be angry, but get angry anyway. And why is that? Because they get false ideas or ideologies in their heads. And how does that happen? Partly, as I've described above and in many videos on this channel, because the educational system has been corrupted since World War II, with an increasing number of postmodernists and woke professors who completely misunderstand the world, who spread that misunderstanding to their students and then to the wider society and its institutions, which they start controlling as the older generation dies off. The great irony of, and in this book, however, is that Dr. Wood himself has either swallowed or taken very seriously one of the self-deceptive beliefs on the right that arose in response to many delusional ideas on the left. Throughout the book, Dr. Wood implies that the 2020 election, as I quoted previously, was stolen from President Trump. Now, this was written in 2021. Perhaps he's changed his mind since. But certainly after the first week that President Trump floated this idea, and even more certainly after all of Trump's bogus claims had been rejected by judges in 61 state and federal courts, this idea hasn't retained the slightest shred of plausibility. What actually happened in truth was that President Trump either deluded or in his oft-demonstrated capacity as a pure liar and narcissist of the first order simply couldn't or wouldn't accept that he had lost. And like a fly fisherman over a country stream, he gently set that fly right down in the middle. And 2/3 of Republicans, like a trout rising to the surface, took that bait hook, line, and sinker. Do you really want to understand how anger is created, Peter Wood? And what were the consequences of 2/3 of Republicans taking Trump's bait, getting angry for no actual reason? Simply being unable to tell Trump, you lost, accept it gracefully, and prepare for 2024 when you'll have a great chance to win? The consequences of that mutual self-deception were horrendous for the country. First, both Georgia's seats were lost, which essentially gave the Democrats both houses, rubber stamping many of Biden's crazy policies. And then Trump, by continuing in his delusion or lies, lost enormous credibility, which destroyed any future political viability to win the presidency in 2024. An utter catastrophe. This is what occurred when those on the right couldn't tell Trump, who desperately needed their help, to set him straight the truth. In conclusion, I would give this book a C+. On the one hand, most people from the center to the right will be sympathetic to his portrayal of a more angry America, as I was. And since there are no theoretical passages in its 194 pages, it makes for very easy reading. That America is getting more angry is certainly worth describing. On the other hand, I never would have purchased and read this book if I had known that he offers no convincing explanation and doesn't even really try for why America seems to be getting more angry. One reason, as I argued here, is that government is getting bigger and bigger in many different ways. And secondly, that you Americans are becoming more ideological. The great irony here being that the very president of the superlative National Association of Scholars, Peter Wood himself, not only likely became a prey to Trump's Stop the Steal delusion, rejected by, again, 61 state and federal judges. Were they all members of the Kraken, Peter? But he also failed to call out Trump's attempted treason in attempting to get Mike Pence to not accept the state ballots on the floor of the Senate. On that note of disappointment, which contains, however, not a trace of anger, I bid you well and remain the Scarlet Pimpernel.